Hi there, it's Tracy Kiernan from stepbysteppainting.net, and this acrylic painting tutorial is going to show you how to paint a spring scene. So I call this painting Busy Bee. We are going to paint 3 different kinds of flowers and a detailed bumblebee. I'm going to first go over the colors that I used for this tutorial. There's quite a few colors this time around. So we have titanium white, Mars black, primary blue, burnt umber, light blue permanent, cad orange hue, cad yellow medium, green deep permanent, and dioxazine purple. Also not pictured, I used brilliant purple, but if you don't have brilliant purple, you can just mix white with the darker purple, and that's kind of the same thing. You'll also need a pencil to draw the flowers. If you want to use the template for this, I have a Traceable download. I only used 2 brushes for this painting, a 3/4 flat and a number 4 round brush. These are the Princeton Velvet Touch brushes. So let's go ahead and get started. I am working on an 11 by 14 inch canvas. However, you can do this on any size canvas that you have available. Let's go ahead and dip our 3/4 flat in the water. And I have light blue permanent and titanium white. I'm just going to call it light blue and white. We are going to paint the background first. So let's go ahead and cover our blank white canvas with colors so that we can do the rest of this design. So there's a couple ways you can do this background. If you want to do like a gradient style where you're all doing left and right strokes and just kind of making that blue go lighter towards the bottom, you can do it that way. Lately I've been kind of bored with doing that kind of background, so I've been doing more of these like angled expressive style strokes. And I'm going to, so this is just the blue right now, but we are going to blend some of that white in there as well, but we just kind of want to do a thin layer. So if you want to add a little bit of water to your brush to kind of thin that paint down, you can. I'm working on one of those canvas panels. So I find that the panels, the paint doesn't spread as easily as the stretched canvas is. So you might see me kind of using a little bit more paint and kind of working harder to get that paint to spread a little bit better. But this top quarter of the painting is all of this light blue. We want to get it all filled up, no blank spots of the canvas. And then I'm going to grab the titanium white. So my brush is double loaded at this point. This white is going to blend in with the blue. Same kind of strokes, kind of expressive strokes. If you're doing left and right horizontal strokes, you would just be painting straight across the canvas and just letting that white blend with the blue. So basically we want this entire canvas to be blue. We want it to be a little darker at the top and much, much lighter on the bottom. That's going to create kind of the illusion that it's sky. Usually in sky paintings, the sky is much lighter towards the bottom where the horizon line is and darker at the top. That's how we can create depth in our sky. I'm going to add more of this blue here. And it doesn't have to be perfectly consistent. In fact, the last step in this painting, we're going to be painting little circles kind of all throughout the sky. So if it's not blended perfectly, you're not even going to notice that at the end. You just want to make sure that we are doing our best to get it to be lighter as we work our way down. So just continuing to do these angled strokes, letting those colors kind of blend on the canvas. As we go down, we want to add more white onto our brush, but it doesn't turn to pure white at the bottom. In fact, one of our flowers is a daisy that's the bright white color. So if our sky was pure white at the bottom, that daisy is not going to show up very well. So we want to make sure that the bottom is a lighter version, a much lighter version of that blue. So just keep going until your entire canvas is filled up. You're going to find that you're going to need a lot of white for this as you work your way down. Continue to mix white with that blue and try to get it to be lighter. If it ends up being a little bit darker in some areas, like what happened here, that's okay. When you are done with the background, you want to let this first layer dry. It shouldn't take that long to dry because it's a relatively thin layer of paint. So when everything is dry, we're going to draw the 3 flowers. If you're not drawing this with me and using the template, you can place a sheet of graphite paper under the printable and trace that. So I'm going to start on the left with the purple coneflower. And the first shape of that flower is that middle cone piece. So it's like a triangular shape, but the corners are rounded. And this flower, we see the side view, so we're going to see all the petals on the bottom part below that cone. And then I'm going to sketch the petals. So these petals are very kind of long and narrow. They are very much more narrow at the base. So you want to, when you do the base, that piece is very narrow, touching that cone piece, but then it goes out wider and then kind of to a point. And so that first petal is kind of your baseline for the rest of the petals, the size and shape of them. But then the next ones, we want to make it look like they're kind of going behind some of them. So some of them are overlapping each other, some are in front. You can kind of alternate, like make a pattern, like one is in front, one is behind. Or you can just kind of randomize it. When we get up here, these petals are a little bit more narrow because of the angle of the view. It's like a side view of this flower, so those ones would be kind of skewed and more narrow versus the ones that are at the bottom, which are a little bit wider. And then some petals are completely behind other petals and we wouldn't see the full shape. I'm going to go ahead and kind of make this darker. So this flower takes up the lower left quadrant of the painting. That's kind of how big it is. So it's in the bottom half, and on the left side, it's on the bottom left corner area. It's very large. The overlapping of the petals gives it that realistic look. The stem, I didn't mention it, but it's a very kind of narrow rectangular shape, almost completely vertical. And it's aligned to kind of the center part of the cone. And then we can draw some very narrow leaves here. The view of this painting is just the top part of the flower, so we don't see a lot of the rest of the stem, and we wouldn't see a lot of leaves, but there's going to still be leaves kind of sticking up in this painting. So I did the one kind of narrow leaf for now. I'm going to get the placement of this daisy in before I do the blue bonnet, so kind of switching gears here to the lower right quadrant of the canvas. The center part of the daisy, so I just did a kind of a medium-sized circle, similar size to the cone of the coneflower, but lower than the coneflower. So this daisy's kind of, it's going to be kind of going off the canvas here. And then we can do each of the petals. So the petals are kind of similar to the coneflower, only they're more rounded on the ends. So we can start at the base of it. The base is still kind of narrow. And then a lot of these petals just kind of go off the edge of the canvas. And this is a frontal view of the daisy. So we see all the petals going in a kind of a radial direction, but they're all pretty much the same size. So we can even do a little bit of overlapping with these daisy petals, but they don't all have to be the same. They could be kind of swaying to the left or right a little bit of overlapping. And then we can do kind of a more narrow leaf that's kind of just sticking up over here. I'm not going to draw a lot of leaves in. It's easier just to kind of paint those in when that step comes. With this blue bonnet, we're going to just do kind of a simple sort of elongated wavy branch line. It would be very tedious to draw all the little blue bonnet tiny blue flowers in, but I just did the branch structure, so we kind of have the direction that we're going to be painting our little blue flowers in. So just a long branching line with 4 tiny branch lines, and then kind of another maybe a narrow leaf over here to make this one a little bit more symmetrical. If you want to draw more leaves in, you can. I also didn't draw the bee in yet. If you want to draw the bee in now, you can, but that will be done at a later step. So next we're going to go ahead and load our palette with the colors of the purple coneflower. I used Brilliant Purple and Dioxazine Purple, so we have a light purple and a dark purple. And we'll also need some titanium white for this. If you don't want to use the lavender color purple, Dioxazine Purple mixed with white makes essentially the same color as that light purple. So let's go ahead and use the number 4 round brush for this. And I'm going to start with the very center lower petal. And let's just start with pure Dioxazine Purple. So I'm going to load it in the purple. And then I'm just going to paint this petal in. So I like to kind of paint the outline of the petal first. Grab a little bit of that lighter purple as well and just kind of do some wet on wet blending. Do these kind of vertical strokes. And that's going to create a little bit of that petal texture and give it that unblended look. Grab a little bit of white and just do a few like vertical white strokes, but don't let it blend all the way. So we have this petal that isn't just a solid purple, it's got a blend of the lighter purple and the white. And I'm just going to essentially do the same thing with each each of the petals. You want to pay attention to where they overlap. So this petal right here is kind of under the one on the right. So you want to kind of alter your purple. So the one on the right ended up being a little bit darker. So right here, I'm just going to add a little bit more darkness to this edge. That's going to make it look like it is overlapping the one on the left of it, because we created enough contrast with that purple by kind of altering the lightness and darkness of the petals when they're next to each other. So this one, the part that's next to the petal, we want to either make it lighter or darker. So in this case, I made the edge of that slightly lighter, which means that this petal, it's not really, it is kind of behind that one, but I am making it darker so that it stands out a little bit better. So that's how you create that different highlight and shadowing with that, kind of just with a few strokes. Just letting that blend onto the canvas. So right here, this petal is behind the one next to it. So we want to make sure that the part that touches it, I made that part lighter because the edge of that petal is darker. Just letting our purples kind of blend together, just kind of playing around with those colors, letting them blend on the canvas, kind of do their thing. And then you just want to paint each of your petals using that same kind of blending technique. So right here, this one is overlapping a bit. So I'm going to make that part, that edge part, lighter. This petal where we just see kind of the end of it is, I'm going to use just that dark purple because it would be a little bit shadowy because it's under the rest of the petals. So for those ones, just use a very, very dark part of the purple. And then this one is kind of overlapping, but not quite completely. So you just using kind of a dark on the edge and a little bit lighter towards the bottom. So yours will definitely look different from mine depending on the order that you painted your petals in and whether you choose dark or lights to make your petals contrast against each other. And then I like to take, while this is not dry all the way, just taking that white and just kind of doing these lines that kind of blend in towards the, so just on the top part of the petals. and letting them blend in. You don't want to use too much white. If you get too much white in there, it might look like a purple striped petal. We don't want stripes. Just letting that white kind of gently blend to create some more highlight and texture in those petals. Go back over some of the edges of these. I'm going to load my palette with Green Deep Permanent, and we're going to paint the first layer of the middle cone piece of the flower. So I'm just going to mix, we want this first layer to be really dark. I'm going to mix Dioxazine Purple with the Green Deep Permanent. It's going to make a very, very dark purple color with green in it. Almost a black color, or a very, very dark green color. Anyway, so we're just going to paint that cone shape with that color. So this is the first layer. It's dark, but we will add the pollen later. And then since we have this green on our palette now, I'm going to do the stem, but rinse the purple off. Quickly grab some white, do a little bit of edging on some of these flowers. So if you take that white and just kind of gently highlight some of those edges, that can help you get some of those petals to stand out a little bit better. It's very loosely. It should not be a thick outline at all. Go back and kind of soften that edge a little bit. So for the stem, we can use our green. Paint the stem so it's kind of lined up in the center part. Just kind of a thick, consistent vertical stroke. If you want to highlight the stem, you can grab a little bit of white and on one side, kind of blend that white on one side and just kind of let the other part stay unblended. And then we can do our leaves. So same color, that Green Deep Permanent. So I'm going to start with kind of a solid color of the green, but then we can take that white and on one side of the leaf, kind of at the top, using that white to blend with that green on the canvas. So the top half of that leaf is lighter, and then going back and kind of adding some darker green on the bottom. So we have a leaf that has two different tints of green on there. We do the same thing to this leaf. Start out by making it kind of solid green and add a little bit of white just at the top and kind of let that blend in with the rest of that green so that top part of the leaf is lighter, and then go back and add some dark towards the bottom. Next, we are going to paint the little blue flowers in on the blue bonnet flower. I'm going to go ahead and rinse your round brush off and load primary blue onto your palette. And let's start off very light with these flowers. So I'm going to grab a little bit of blue on my brush, but grab a whole bunch of white to lighten that color up. And at the very, very top, we have these very sort of light colored, almost green. So if you want to grab a little bit of your green up there, we can add a little bit of green buds that haven't quite bloomed yet. But then down here, as we work our way down, our flowers get darker and more deeper. So basically, these are just little tiny strokes, kind of curved strokes that are kind of curving upwards, little clusters of blue dots that are kind of gathered together. These are attached to green stems, but we are not going to paint all of those green stems. We're just going to paint mostly the blue buds. There's a variety here. So you can add a little bit of white to your brush as well to kind of vary that. And it gets a little bit whiter. So it's narrow at the top. And then as we work our way down the stem, it's getting whiter and darker and deeper, and the little blossoms are getting kind of thicker, so we can do thicker strokes. So those flowers, we do have some stems that are showing, so you can kind of paint the flowers on the edges of those teeny branches that you drew. We can just kind of go in and add more width towards the bottom. There's a little bit of purple in this as well, so grab some of your Dioxazine Purple, and just on the bottom of some of those clusters, you can do little tiny kind of purple dots in there. That purple really adds to the deepness and the richness of that blue. And then we can take that white and just kind of add some highlight and lighter colors, especially towards the top. It's a very simplistic way of painting a blue bonnet, just by painting little tiny strokes of color. And we can do our stem. So the stem is done with that green deep permanent, and I'm kind of twisting my brush there because I know I need to do a very thin kind of narrow stroke for that thin stem. So I just want that paint right there on the tip of the brush. I'm gonna add a little bit of yellow to my palette. The reason is I want to change this kind of green to more of like a yellowish green, so it kind of stands out against our coneflower leaf, which is more of that pure green. So adding that bit of yellow, so especially right here, so that it looks like a different kind of green. So you can decide if that's going above or overlapping your leaf from the coneflower or going behind. For now, for me, it's going behind. And then wherever there's gaps up here, you can paint a little stem where those gaps are. And if they're branching out, you can paint that little stem where they're branching out at. And then blue bonnets have these very kind of narrow, sort of pointed leaves. So for this, I'm just kind of pressing hard up on my brush at first, or you can do it the opposite. Do the lighter stroke at first for the tip and then press down on your brush for the thicker part. So you press down for thick and then you release the pressure for thin, and that creates your kind of narrow pointed leaves. Next, we're going to go ahead and rinse the brush off and start painting our daisy in. So we can go ahead and start with the petals in titanium white, and I'm just going to fill them in pretty solid. We will add a little bit of gray to these petals later so that we can get some texture in there and some shading, but right now let's just do solid white. If you find it easy to go ahead and paint that circle in, you can. You can grab the yellow, and I have yellow on my and white on my brush here, so I'm just filling that in solid. That white helps that yellow be bright and opaque. Rinse and go back to the white. So each of these petals is a little bit narrow at the base, and it gets wider and more rounded on the outside. A lot of these petals are just going off the side of the canvas. So I'm just kind of putting more pressure on the brush as you go outwards, starting out with a little bit of pressure at the base so it's thinner, and then just kind of press harder on the brush as that petal shape goes more outwards. These petals down here might get a little lost, especially since we're only working with one color, but it's helpful to just kind of outline that outer shape of the petal so we don't lose the shape of it. Start out thin, it goes a little bit narrow. And these petals don't have to be, they're relatively the same size and shape, each of the petals, but they don't have to be evenly spaced apart. Some of them can be kind of swaying to the left or the right a little bit, and there are some that are overlapping each other or underneath the petal next to it. And if we need to go back and redo that circle, we will. In fact, we will add some brown in there later for some shadowing. I'm going to go back and do another layer of yellow on that circle. So that circle should be above any of the petal bases. So that's in front. And I'm going to go ahead and rinse and dry my brush and add a little bit of Mars Black to my palette so that I can add some gray shading to some of the petals. So this is Mars Black. And then we want to go ahead and mix white with it. So a teeny tiny bit of black to make this light to medium gray color. It shouldn't be too dark at all. So on the base and on the outer parts of some of these petals, so I'm going to kind of loosely outline the outer shape of it. But then in the middle part of the base, I'm just going to do these kind of lines that kind of blend back up into the white part of the daisy petal. So we don't want to intentionally turn the entire petal gray. We just want to use this gray to kind of give it some shading towards the middle part, the bottom part of each of the petals. So you're just loosely outlining some of the outer edge of it, but not the entire petal. And then just doing these lines on the bottom that blend up into the rest of that white. And then if you think you've added too much gray somewhere, you can always go back, grab some white, and let that white kind of blend back in with the rest of the petal. So this one right here, we have an overlapping, or this one's going under that petal. So I kind of outlined the petal next to it. So that edge of that petal is a little bit darker, and that other petal stands out some more. So it's kind of the same technique that we did with the purple coneflower, only we're using black and white for this. And the majority of the petals are super bright white, but using that gray to kind of create that shadowing and that edging on some of those petals. Next, I'm going to paint the rest of the leaves in. So first I decided that this blue bonnet stem was going to be in front. So I'm going to extend, so see how that leaf is overlapping it. I'm going to extend that up, and then I'm going to go ahead and paint that leaf in. So with that leaf, I added yellow to my green to make it more of a yellowish green. And I kind of changed it from how my drawing was displaying. So do a little bit of pressure at first, press down on the brush to create that thicker stroke, and then you can release the pressure again. We have the stem. So the daisy stem could go behind our petals. We can always paint our petals back over any of these leaves. So maybe if you don't want that leaf to look like it's going in front, you can wait for that to dry, and then you can go back and repaint the edge of that petal. It's kind of up to you to decide what's overlapping and what's not. And then I did a little grass marks, so little tiny, very thin strokes. Some of these strokes are a little bit higher for some bigger leaves. So you're just using the tip of the brush, the pointed part of the brush, to create these little grass marks. Some are higher, some lower. Just kind of be careful with what's overlapping your flower petals and what's not. You don't really want to mess up anything by overlapping something you don't want to overlap. So we can keep it simple. We don't have to add that many grass blades in there. I'm going to dry all of the flowers really quick and then erase any pencil marks. So when you're doing erasing, the pencil will erase as long as any paint isn't over it. So if you see pencil and the paint's already gone over the pencil, that likely will not erase. But pencil that has not been painted on will erase. So that's what I'm doing here. You just want to make sure everything's completely dry if you're erasing pencil lines. You don't want to smudge any thicker paint strokes that didn't dry yet. So I erased all those pencil lines to kind of clean that up a bit. And then I'm kind of going back over some of these petals that I want to be more in front instead of behind the leaves and stem. So our stem ended up disappearing a little bit. And then I'm going to load some burnt umber onto my palette, and we're going to use this brown to create that darker shading that's in the center part of our daisy. So go ahead and mix about equal parts brown and yellow. That's going to kind of tone down your brown a little bit, make it more closer to that yellow color. And then we're going to do stippling. So that means we're just doing dots. So just on the outer part of that circle, and actually we're overlapping some of the base of the petals on purpose. And then kind of wipe your brush off, and we're going to get that to blend in with the rest of the yellow in the center, but we're going to need more yellow on our palette. So if your yellow has dried up, or if you need more yellow, I need more yellow. And then taking that yellow, and so next to that brown kind of ring that we made, we're just stippling more yellow dots, letting that brown just kind of blend in. So the center part of the daisy is a lot brighter than the outer part. And then we can add just a teeny bit of white, a few little white dots right in the center to make that center part of our daisy super bright. We're going to do kind of the same thing for our coneflower. So if you want, you can rinse the brush completely off, or you can just use whatever's still on your brush. Go ahead and mix brown and yellow together. So about equal amounts, brown and yellow. We're going to start at the bottom, and this is also stippling. So I'm doing these short strokes. These strokes are going a little bit more vertical instead of rounded. So starting at the very, very bottom of your cone, little strokes with that brown. It's not going to show up super bright at first, but that's because this bottom part should be dark anyway. And as you work your way up, you're adding more yellow, less brown to your brush, but still kind of stippling. Each row that you kind of stipple with the tip of your brush is kind of overlapping the previous row. And then when you get towards the top, add a little bit of white to your brush. That white is going to make that yellow look super bright all of a sudden. And just take that white, just kind of gently blend it down, still doing little stipple dots. You can definitely go outside the outer line edge of the cone shape that you painted. So those few little pops of white here and there really help brighten the entire cone piece. But also the bottom part is still slightly darker than the top part. I am going to add another coat to some of these leaves. So this is the Green Deep Permanent that I just loaded on my palette. I'm just going to go over some of these leaves, make them just a little bit darker, stand out a bit better. We are going to paint our bee next. So he is the main focus, well, one of the main focuses of this painting, a very detailed bumblebee. So this step takes quite a bit of time. And so this would be a good chance to take a break and come back because this is a challenge part of the painting. So with the bee, I found it easy to just kind of take the pencil and draw sort of a kidney bean shape of the bee, so it's kind of hovering above the coneflower so I can get the shape of the size of him down. So like a jelly bean, kidney bean shape. And then load your palette with yellow and use the round brush. And let's go ahead and paint that shape in. So I kind of altered this a bit when I painted it in, including the lower left part. I made that more pointed instead of rounded. So paint that in solid yellow. Don't worry about where the stripes or the head or the wings are going to go yet. This yellow is getting good coverage for the most part. If your background is a little dark right here and the yellow is not showing up, you may want to paint this white first and then go back over with the yellow so that your yellow will be brighter. Go ahead, rinse your brush off and freshen your palette with some Mars Black if you don't have black already on your palette. And then go ahead and load your brush in the black. We're going to go ahead and paint the bee's head. So we're just going to, this is going to actually go outside of that jelly bean shape a little bit. So it's kind of like a teardrop shape, like an oval with a point at the bottom. Make it a little bit bigger. So there's his head. And then I'm going to do the little stinger. So at the very, very end right here, that's pointed. And then his first stripe. So this stripe is going in a curved direction. So leave some space for that yellow. So it's a fuzzy bumblebee. To make it kind of look fuzzy, we're going to do short strokes. So I'm doing little dashed lines that kind of go out and overlap our yellow a little bit. It's going to make that first stripe look a little bit fuzzy. I'll let it go outside the lines a little bit more. And then we can do our second stripe. So little short lines. If it helps, you can do the shape of the stripe first and then go back over that with the short lines. So the yellow for me is not dry all the way. It is blending a little bit with the black, but it's not causing it any issues. So for me, that's fine. If it is causing issues for you, you can let the yellow dry and then proceed with this step. So little fuzzy lines that overlap parts of that yellow is going to make those stripes it's going to make those stripes look a little bit fuzzy. We can also make the head look a little bit fuzzy by making those little tiny tick marks kind of go outside that shape, kind of outside and overlapping parts of the sky area. Teeny tiny bits. You don't want it to be very long, just enough to give it that fuzzy look. For the antenna, you can draw these first if you don't really feel confident, but it's just a curved line. This one's more vertical than the other one. Kind of goes vertical and then it curves and there's like a little dash on the end. This one curves out a little bit further, but it's definitely more bowed, hanging over. And then we can do the legs. So bees have 6 legs, but we only see 4 in this. The other 2 are kind of hidden in the back. So we see 2 right here. So these are just segmented lines that are kind of drooping down. Makes it look like our bee is hovering over the pollen part of our coneflower. You can also make the legs look kind of fuzzy by painting little tick marks on the upper part of his legs. Same thing, just like a little segmented leg shape that's attached to the body with little tiny fur pieces attached to the leg. And then we can do the eye. So if you want to rinse completely off, you can. Otherwise, you can just kind of wipe your brush off because we only need a little tiny bit of white. A little bit of white on the tip of the brush. I'm just doing like a 1 stroke, creating sort of an oval shape. And then on the inside of that, the little black part on the inside of that oval piece. Next, you want to go ahead, rinse, dry, and we want to start highlighting this bee, give him more detail. Let's mix yellow and white together on our palette. So this is going to make a very light yellow color. And then on the top part of the yellow part stripes, we're going to add little tiny dashed strokes just on the top part and just on the yellow. And then load orange onto your palette. So this is Cad Orange Hue. And take the orange and add little tiny strokes of orange dashes towards the bottom of the yellow area. That's going to give it a little bit of shadow in that area. And then I added just a little bit more yellow kind of towards the bottom of the stinger area. And then we're going to rinse and dry and grab our white. So we're going to do a little bit of highlighting on the black part. So if your black is super soaked and this is not working, let that dry a bit and then come back to that step. Basically, you're just adding a few little white dots just on the top part of the black area. That is going to highlight that part of the bee. Our bee is looking cute and kind of fuzzy now. we are needing to do the wings next. So again, if it's super soaked, don't do this step until it's dry. But what I did was I took the white. I'm also doing a little extra pollen kind of in this area, little white dots kind of floating up from the coneflower. But you'll need titanium white to do the wings. So load just the tip of the brush in titanium white. And again, if you feel better drawing the wings out first, you can, or you can just use your brush to start drawing the wings. This one starts at the top, just to the left of his head, and then has two bumps that kind of curve inwards to form kind of a heart shape. Then our second wing looks slightly different. That one is just kind of a curved oval shape that goes to a point and meets at the same part where that first wing meets. And when you fill it in, you want to make sure that this is very thin, so you can water your white down to kind of a watercolor consistency, or you can just apply a very, very thin layer of white paint, almost dry brush style. So there's not a lot of white paint on my brush, very, very small amount. You don't want that to be super opaque like the daisy petals. You want it to be very thin and kind of see-through. So just paint both of those wings in with a very thin coat of white paint. This wing right here, I actually added another little kind of oval shape to the bottom of it to give that wing a little bit more shape. Next, we want to load black on the very, very tip of our brush, and we want to very loosely outline. Let's start at the bottom with the bottom front wing. I am going to move my hand away, I promise, but I loosely outline the top edge of that wing and painted two kind of oval shapes inside the wing, a third oval shape actually inside the wing. They all kind of attach to each other, and that gives that wing kind of that textured look. I did the same thing for this top wing. Very loose oval shape in the center, one on top of it, or two kind of lines that kind of like stretch out to the end of the wing. And I just outlined the bottom or the left part of the wing shape. And that is it for our detailed bumblebee. If you want to go in and kind of render him further, you can. I am going to move along and do a few touch-ups to the flowers. I decided I wanted to add another petal to our coneflower. So we have kind of a bit of a gap on the right. So I wanted another dark petal in between those far right petals. So over here, I did just pure Dioxazine Purple. And then with the white, I kind of touched up that petal that's overlapping it, making sure that that part is lighter next to the darker petal. And then I took the white and added a few more little white dots kind of up here in this area. And then I'm going to touch up the daisy petals. So with the titanium white, going back over some of these petals that should be overlapping some of our grass pieces and leaf pieces. So the daisy is very much in front of any of those green things that are sticking up from the ground. Then I'm going to show you how I did all the dots that are in the sky, kind of a bokeh whimsical effect to the background. You can completely skip this step if you don't want to do it, if you don't like the look of it, or if you don't want to do this many, you could do a few kind of in one area of the sky and not all over. But basically, we want to paint very, very translucent white circles. So there's lots of ways to do this kind of technique, but I've been doing it this way a lot. I've been kind of taking my brush, kind of making a dot, and then using my finger to smear that outwards. That creates that blurry sort of translucent circle. And you want to do this, I'm doing it all over the sky because I went crazy with it. But you want to kind of overlap some. You want to change the brightness. So some are dimmer, some are brighter. There are some that are smaller, bigger, so you want to change the brightness and the size of them. And to do that, it just depends on how far out you're smearing the circles. So not a lot of paint for smaller circles. If you're going to do a bigger circle, you apply a lot more paint. I find doing it this way doesn't mess up your brush as much because you're not using that brush to smear the paint outwards. You're using your finger. You're just using the brush to create a dot. You could use your brush to just paint the circles. That's also an option, or do a variety. So I'm doing some smaller dots here. You can even use your blue to change the consistency of the white. So adding blue into it will make kind of a more dimmer, kind of a light blue color in the circle. So utilizing that light blue permanent color will also create variety in your circles. So it just creates a really pretty whimsical effect in the background of the sky. I did dots that were more blue down here. And then I did some dots that were not blurred out. They were just little solid dots. Maybe these are pieces of pollen kind of floating in the air. You can do some more down in the flower area. So like right here, little dots. And the last touch up that I decided to do was add a little bit more blue to my blue bonnets. So with that primary blue color, especially down in the lower area where it should be really rich and deep and dark. So I added some more of the darker flowers towards the bottom to get that to kind of stand out a little bit better. And that is it. This is the conclusion to our fun spring painting, Busy Bee. Hope you enjoyed painting with me. Thanks for watching, and thanks for painting with me.